Our lesson of Scripture this morning comes to us from John's Gospel. I'll be reading from chapter 8. We'll be reading verses 1 through 11. Hear now the reading of God's holy word. Then each of them went home, while Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
The story that Mike just read about the woman caught in adultery, facing the prospect of being stoned to death, is not primarily about the particular sin of adultery. It's about Jesus' encounter with people who had lost touch with who they were, and it's not good people as opposed to bad people. The Pharisees who brought this woman to Jesus, for them, framed it in terms of good people, bad person. There they stand, condemning, filled with anger, teeth gritted, righteously indignant, and feeling pretty good about themselves by comparison. Not perfect, but pretty good. Because people like her made them feel good when they looked at her and her behavior, and they would say to themselves, I'm not perfect, but I'm so far ahead of where she is that God's got to be pleased with me. And Jesus puts them back in touch with exactly who they are, with that line of his that has been quoted so many times in the 2,000 years since he spoke it, that no one could even begin to count. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And they go, "Oh." And they remember. And Jesus, after he says that, squats back down on the ground and starts writing in the sand with his finger. And when he looks up, every one of them who had come to accuse him, to accuse her, is gone. So, what happened? They remembered who they were, and they remembered how they were. There are two truths about us. And it's the balance between those two truths that really is the truth about who we are. And the first truth is that we're children of God. We're created in the image of God. That's a wonderful truth. Second truth about us is that we are not always so good, that we're fallen short of the glory of God, even though we're created in the image of God, that we fall sometimes sort of short, and sometimes we fall way short. But short is short. Our origin is good because we come from God. Our day-to-day, it's a mixture. And that's the truth about us, that we are a mixture. We're neither good nor bad. Those are not words that describe us in hardly any circumstances. What's the word then that describes us in most circumstances of our lives? We are sinners. That was Jesus' reality check for the crowd that brought this woman to him that day. And he went straight to the common denominator, the truth about every one of us, and it brought everybody up short because they knew when he said it that it was the truth. We have this problem that follows us from generation to generation, and it is that every generation thinks that it is a little better than the generation that has preceded. Every generation fails with whatever new solutions they bring along. They try, but they fail because that's what we human beings do in the course of things as we try to deal with this world that God gave us trust over. Next generation comes along, and it assumes that its solutions are going to be better than the generation before it. Last two generations, it's the advance in technology that's really gotten us excited in thinking that, wow, we're doing things now that are going to really change things, and we've turned a corner, and we can affect our world in ways that no generation before can affect it, and therefore it must be a good thing that we're going to do. We increase the speed of the internet. What have you got when you increase the speed of the internet? It means that the bad news can get around even faster. We have Facebook, and we post things on Facebook. More and more people are posting things on Facebook about inappropriate behavior and bad choices. And what happens when they put those posts on Facebook? 20 of their friends like it. It's the sign of the condition we're in that in every generation we fail to recognize what the real situation is, that we're not necessarily making the world a better place, that we're just changing the way we deal with the world, that human nature is always going to come up short dealing with its own devices, with the things that are wrong. The Bible has always described sin, not in terms of specific things that we do that are unacceptable to God. The basic definition of sin is whatever separates us from God. Sin is whatever separates us from God. The Bible's focus is not on certain things we do that are unacceptable. In the first place, it's on the emphasis on the things that we do, not always knowingly, that put a wedge in between between us and God. And what happens when we put a wedge between us and God? A wedge is there to separate things, and that's the way it goes. sin includes everything that we find listed in the Ten Commandments. The specifics: lying, stealing, cheating, adultery. But it also goes to less specific sins. Sins of the heart. Sins that you can't write down on paper. You can't quantify them. But they're things that happen within us that put distance between us and God, that are every bit as bad as some of the don'ts in the Ten Commandments in terms of the effect that they have on our lives. Some sins abuse our bodies. Our bodies are the temple of God. Therefore, when we abuse our bodies, we sin against God. Some sins abuse other people. Other people are children of God. And so when we do those kinds of things to other people, it is a sin. We cannot sin against other people and at the same time not sin against God. How do we usually deal with sin? If there's something that we spot that's out of control in our lives and we know it has to be dealt with, we single that thing out and we work on it. Come up with a plan. We do this, we do that. We have prayer, we have Bible readings. We focus on getting that thing that we consider a problem sin out of our lives. And while we're devoting time and energy to that one specific thing that we see as a problem in our lives, all sorts of things are going around behind our backs. And we turn around and there's another whole set of problems. Any effort to deal with problems in our lives by ourselves is an effort that is doomed to failure. Sounds like a lot of the viruses that are around. Medical people research them. They come up with antibiotics to treat them. And what happens by the time they get the antibiotic on the market? What happens is that the virus has mutated and it's gone in 2 or 3 different directions, and they have to start the whole process over again. Anybody, well, I know we all have, through the years, watched on television some of those end of the world movies. Armageddon, the Body Snatchers, War of the Worlds. In fact, it was so good the first time that Steven Spielberg came back and did a remake of it. We know the plot. Something goes terribly wrong in the world. It threatens to basically destroy civilization. So how is it dealt with? Superhero. Team of brilliant people. Maybe it's just one, like Walker, Texas Ranger. You know that I've never seen a problem that Walker couldn't solve pretty much by himself. Most of the time without having to pull his gun out of his holster. 95% of those movies end with somebody coming up with a miraculous solution that saves the day and makes everything all right. There are a few of them, and a very few of them, where the world literally ends in a ball of fire. I guess my favorite one is from my college days, Dr. Strangelove. And that little final scene where the crazy general named Slim Pickens, who's from Texas, straps a saddle onto the nuclear bomb and rides it down. And I can't remember the old gospel song that they're singing as it all comes to an end. But nobody likes those kind of movies. They don't make many of them because not many of us are going to pay good money to go watch the world blown up, because we believe that somehow human ingenuity, human determination, and human will overcome anything that comes along. That's the problem with sin. The perspective isn't right. We look at ourselves and we give ourselves way more credit than we deserve. Not that we are not people with some real abilities. Created in the image of God, we have to be. But there are things in our life and in this world that are basically out of our control. To believe that we can control those things, that's to be in a state of sin. To understand that there are critical things that are beyond our control, that is to put ourselves in a position to let the grace of God do for us what we cannot do for ourselves, and that is what the cross of Jesus is all about. If everything is in our control, there's no need for God to send Jesus. If things are past a certain point out of our control, then the cross has a place in our lives. Sin's a part of life. God has dealt with it. How we deal with it, how we allow God to deal with it in our lives, that's our choice. My favorite story of sin in the Old Testament is David and Bathsheba. Bathsheba's married to one of David's soldiers. He's off fighting in the war. And she's alone at her house, which is just about a block away from the palace. And Bathsheba regularly goes and takes a bath in the hot Jerusalem summer nights on the roof of her house, which is just below the balcony of the palace. David sees her and finally sends for her and says, "The king wishes to see you." And Bathsheba says, "The king wishes to see little old me? I can't imagine why." As if she doesn't know. Bathsheba gets pregnant on her visit to the palace. They both got a problem. Uriah is away fighting in the war. She is pregnant with a child. What's she going to do? David, to cover his tracks, calls Uriah home from the front lines, gives him a pass for a few days, and says to him, "Uriah, you're such a wonderful soldier. I'm going to give you a few days pass that you can go in and be home and enjoy being with Bathsheba." Well, Uriah is such a dedicated soldier that he has taken a vow of chastity until the king's war is won, and he will not go in the house. He takes his pillow and he goes and sleeps on the front door stoop. And this is no good, because everyone sees him sleeping on the front door stoop. David has to do something else. So he sends Uriah back to the front lines with a note for the general, and the note says, "Put Uriah in the worst part of the battle and make sure that he gets killed. And when he dies, you send word back to me." And that happens. And David has crocodile tears to shed over Uriah. And as a public gesture, he decides that in his magnanimity, he will take in Bathsheba as his wife and care for her, since his good soldier Uriah has given his life for his country. And they have the baby, and everybody thinks that what a good fellow David is. Now, David breathes a sigh of relief until the prophet Nathan comes in. And he's got one of these long, bony fingers, and when he puts the word of the Lord on you, he does it right in your face. And David is caught red-handed. Now, how should this story end? It ought to end with David and Bathsheba both paying the price. But God's logic and God's way sometimes takes a different path. 1,000 years later, when the child is born who is going to be God's answer to the problem of sin, guess who shows up way back in that child's family tree? Oh yes, yeah, the two of them. When you trace the genealogy back, David and Bathsheba, in their bad moments, sinners of the first order, somehow received forgiveness and became a part of the plan of salvation. That's the way God works. One of the hellfire preachers of colonial America, a fellow named Jonathan Edwards, he preached a sermon that made such an impact that it was printed into little pamphlets and it was spread all over the colonies and out into the frontier as the country moved west. And it was entitled Sinner in the Hands of an Angry God. It was hands down the most famous sermon ever preached in colonial America. And people would take that pamphlet and they would sit and read it in the privacy of their homes, and they would literally shake. Jesus took a different approach. Not that judgment wasn't a part of the message that he brought, but Jesus' approach was more along the lines of not sinners in the hands of an angry God, but sinners in the hands of a loving God. When push comes to shove, I always try to put more stock in what Jesus says. But whichever way it is, an angry God, a loving God, or both, we are sinners and we are in the hands of God. God has dealt with it in the cross. It's for us to deal with on our end in our own lives. Some of us have dealt with it. Some of us have a burden for someone who hasn't dealt with it. As we come closer and closer to Holy Week and the cross of Jesus, let me invite you as we close the service, either in your pew or if you choose at the rail, to come forward and affirm that truth. That it's not a matter of being good or bad, it's a matter of being a sinner and needing forgiveness for it. To claim that truth, to affirm that truth, to lift up someone about whom you have a burden. And remember that God has dealt with it in the cross. It is up to us and up to the people that we love and care about to deal with it in their own lives. In your pew or at the chancel rail, I invite you to claim it, to give thanks for it, that you have already claimed it, to share a burden for someone that you care about very much.